then I'm going to go ahead and call our open session to order. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call our open session to order. It's 6:37 p.m. and we're going to go ahead and begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. We do not have a student with us tonight, so I'll lead us, but if you could unmute and join me, we're going to rise and place our hands over our hearts. And we'll say together, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. Next on the agenda, we'll go ahead and do the roll call. Linda, when you're ready.
Trustee Donnelly.
Present.
Trustee Friedman.
Present.
Trustee Rodriguez.
Here.
Trustee Isaac Gonzalez.
Here.
Trustee Jackson Miller.
Here, thank you. Next item is to adopt this evening's agenda. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda for this special meeting?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second. Carolyn.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. And then next on the item on the agenda is public communications. Was there anyone who wanted to make a public communication, make a comment?
Don't have anything on text.
Nothing on email.
I have not gotten a response yet from the waiting room person. It looks like they left and re-entered, so I'm sending another communication.
Okay.
All right. I think we can go ahead and move forward with our discussion item. And if the commenter wants to comment on something, we can take a pause and take the comment. Does that work? All right, very well. So we can get on to our important work here for our discussion item. So Scott, I will give it to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, President Jackson Miller. I'm very honored tonight to welcome Deborah Wright-Keys to our group. She works closely with Nicole as a part of Nicole Anderson and Associates, and does this really meaningful and important work on helping all levels of an organization, in our case, a school district, focus on racial justice and educational equity. I'm really proud of the work that our district's done at all three levels of the organization, at the board level, as we will tonight, at the administrative level, and of course, with our employees and parents in the Racial Justice Task Force. And so this is a part of that continuing effort. And I'm also excited that the reading, the governance core, is being added in as a part of this, because I think it not only accentuates our work on equity, but I know that this board is always really keen on holding themselves accountable through self-evaluation, for example, and have often wondered if there might be other tools available for self-evaluation. So I think this really aligns with that goal, as well as our goal on focusing on equity. And I'm just very excited and honored to welcome in Deborah. And with that, Deborah, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight for the next 2 hours we'll have together. My colleague, of course, Nicole, we could not clone her. She couldn't be in two places at one time. We have been trying to figure out how to do that. We haven't been successful, but I'm so pleased to be able to spend this time with you. This is one of my favorite parts of the training that we do, to really dig deep into board governance. And it's never that board members don't know how to govern. Some boards don't, but definitely not your group. I work with so many across the country, so I know what it looks like, and it's definitely not with your board. You really understand it, but it's never too much. It's always a good idea to carve out time just to focus on governance, to kind of take your mind away from sitting at the board table, and just to, retool, making sure that, yes, I remember this, because so many things are coming at you where we can easily move away from the core governance. And that's what this book is really talking about. And I've read so many books on board governance and leadership. This is by far the best book that Michael Fullen and Davis Campbell put together. It is so, as you can tell, very reader friendly, just straight to the point. And I shared with boards, it's the framework in which you govern. So you don't, it's very clear. Governance, this is where it makes us have to step back to see, do we have the capacity to govern? And I really think this should be a book that candidates should read so that they really know what they're getting into, because you can't change the structure. It's already in place. There's a reason why, of course, that it's the governance structure and lane, if you will, and then the superintendent and his staff's lane to work collaboratively together. So this kind of just puts it in a nice package for you. And so I'm pleased that you guys did choose to, do the book study. We're going to get an abbreviated version of it. I was mentioning to Scott that I usually do over a 6 to 7 month period of studying this book. And so 3 chapters, I could do 2 hours on 1 chapter, but I will not do that to you tonight. But I'm sure that you're ready for some really engaging conversation. So it won't be a sit and get. It will be, I'm going to pose questions of you. I've actually assigned some reading, just to remind, I know you probably, hopefully your book is going to look like this with all the tabs. This will be your tool that you will always can have at the board table with you, just as a reference to kind of go back to say, yeah, it made some really good points. There's some great examples in there. So that's what we're going to do for the next 2 hours. So what I want to, and I mentioned, Superintendent, you mentioned about your equity journey. I read your document. This is so well, and is so well written and very clear, that anyone from the out externally can pick that up and understand the journey that you're on. So I want to commend you for that document. I know it's a lot of work was put in with different areas of the team, Nicole's team, that's helping the school district as a whole. And this is where we're trying to get a lot of districts to get to this point. And so again, you guys are well on your way. And so knowing that you have your equity journey and you guys are living this all the time, what can you say are some equity wins that you have? Since the last time I think we were together, maybe in October, maybe it was. What are some equity wins? What are you celebrating? What are some wins that you have? Anyone, just unmute yourself. And what are your wins?
I would say follow through from some of the beginning of the conversations we've had, and the commitment, I think, is something I would say is hard to do anytime, but especially over these past few years, to keep it going.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. Who else? Go ahead, Phil.
Well, I think it's a win that we have managed to have budget to do this and to continue to do this.
Absolutely, because you can have, just like when you have your strategic plan or you have your LCAP, you can have all these ideas, your goals that you want, but if there is not that line item, how are you going to support it, financially? So that's great that you see the importance of making sure that there's a budget to be able to do this, so that the wheel keeps rolling, because you can have, again, all these ideas, but if the dollars aren't there, it may have to wait until the next year and the next year, and you don't want that to happen. So I appreciate that. Who else? What are your wins?
I'll hop in. I think one win is just continuing to see the commitment from the members of the task force. So I've attended a couple of the meetings so far this year, and I think we maybe have had a little tiny bit of decline in folks who are able to attend, but really, again, considering it's continuing to be virtual, considering it's continuing to be after hours, and we do have a number of employees on that team, I think showing the dedication of the members of that team, and the desire to continue to engage in the work, and again, not just doing sort of the one and done approach where we put a year of hard work into it. We came up with something we stamped and approved and put on the website, and now we're done. So again, just the people are who are involved are clearly committed to it. And at the last meeting, part of the talk was then how do we carry it out? How do we expand it out and get feedback from all of the groups that the stakeholders in the task force represent, or beyond just inside of employee groups, et cetera, parent of this grade of child, et cetera. So that's a win to me.
That is awesome. And the key thing too is keeping people engaged. And I love that you said the desired. It seems like people are interested. And yes, everyone's busy. So I always say we're all on the same playing field. Everyone's busy. We can all agree to that. But you really prioritize and do things that are important to you. And it sounds like that's the momentum that you have. So that is excellent. Who else would like to share a win? What do you think is a win?
Go ahead, Linda.
Go ahead.
We've been having some professional development that's been offered to classified as well as certificated staff. And there's been an alignment between some of the social emotional learning and racial equity. And so it's been really nice to have those conversations and listen to that alignment that's being drawn throughout the district.
And that is so important. Professional development, making sure that it is aligned, because there's so much out there that's offered, but the key thing is making sure that it is aligned to the goals, to, you have a blueprint on where you want to take this. So that's great to hear that it's definitely aligned with SEL as well.
I just have to piggyback on that. It's so meaningful that Linda, as a classified employee, would bring that up, because it's really kind of come from a grassroots effort. We have a social emotional learning community of practice, and several people have been really integral in that, but our ELD teacher on special assignment has really made a concerted effort to she's part of the racial justice task force, and she really makes a concerted effort to take the learnings from that task force and apply them to her work that she does out in the field with English language development. And she's also been integral as with that social emotional learning. So I just really, she did a little presentation the other day, and she was just very mindful about saying that we can't do this work in silos, and has been a real leader in connecting the dots, so that it's not just this little side project that we do, that equity kind of infiltrates everything we do.
Exactly. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That's powerful. Absolutely. Carolina, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I just wanted to add the fact that we're all, the board and the administrators, we're all committed to this work, and there hasn't been just disagreements about the importance of it or anything like that. So it seems like a basic idea, but I think it's worth mentioning.
It definitely is worth mentioning, because it doesn't happen all the time. And so, I would always share with Nicole that doing this equity work, it is really California and the other states, because you guys are way out there. I don't know what it is about California. And I'm excited to see this. And I share this story everywhere I go to tell them, they need to pay attention to what you guys are doing. And so to have the board and the administrative staff, you're creating that culture where you don't ever want Scott to leave, and you don't want the board members to leave. But if different people are in the seat, it will not stop this work. And that's what you're doing, creating the culture of anyone who wants to join in. They already understand how you are operating, the work that's important to you. So that is very key, that the commitment is there. You would think it's easier said. It is easier said than done, but it takes work. And then that's what you guys have definitely demonstrated. So I appreciate that. Let's see, Ted. Go ahead. Hi, Ted.
I'm stumped. I don't know what to say.
Is he stumped for words? Does that happen?
Well, I actually don't know what to say.
You really don't know what to say. I thought you were being fun. Okay.
No, I honestly, I'm just I'm stumped. So.
Okay.
And I'm trying to get my life together in the Zoom world. So I'm finally here.
Okay. Yeah. If you think of something, just definitely feel free.
If I can just add one more thing, I would
Sure.
say the work of the Racial Justice Task Force subcommittees, those groups have been really eager And it's been, kind of a balance to make sure we're not going too fast, but fast enough. And feels like they're at a really good place. I know I get to work with the staffing subcommittee, and we recently reached out to Nicole and asked for some examples of districts and that have like pre-established pathways for persons of color to enter the teaching profession. So that's something, really kind of moving into the next phase, the real, tangible parts of seeing if we can get some, some identified pathways. It can even start as early as high school, or maybe even for us, middle school. And then into university, of trying to really set persons of color who may be interested in the teaching profession to join the teaching profession, and even better yet, join the teaching profession in our district. So it feels kind of like it's moving at the right pace, like we've done our groundwork, and now we're really kind of moving in some real concrete ways.
Absolutely. And those are all key areas, because you can either think of growing your own, which of course it takes time, but also, identifying students who, like, I want to, really pay attention to you and position them in a place where this is really something that they're interested in, because we know. And then of course, partnering with universities. Just actually before this, I was on a Zoom call about this. How do you create that strand, that pipeline? And there are 2 universities that produce educators, urban educators, as they call them, and it's Michigan State and Columbia University. And so partnering with them, because they're growing them for you, but not fast enough, obviously,
right,
because everyone's trying to get to it, but it just reaching out and doing something different, challenging your HR department to say, what process do you have in place to get different individuals in the candidate pool? You can't force people to do this, but how do we diversify the pool at least? And so just different ideas. So great. So this is great to hear, just being able to celebrate your wins.
So Scott, to add to that,
yes,
Santa Cruz City Schools, I believe, does a middle school job fair in the springs, and so I think we talked about that maybe out here, but it gives everyone a chance to talk about what it is they might want to do, and it's a great place to like plant a seed.
That's a great example. We can piggyback off of that.
Absolutely. Most definitely. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm not sure of how my view is going to be, if I won't be able to see everyone, but this is very informal. So at any point you can just pose a question, just say, Deborah, I got a question, or just jump in there. So we're going to move it along just so that we can try to cover as much as possible here. And I want to make sure that you can see my screen. And of course, as we always start, the engagement, and of course, I did see this in your equity journey document. So you guys are very familiar with the agreements, and you certainly, I'm sure all the groups that you work with, make sure you focus on staying engaged, and how we still experience the discomfort as you continue to peel away on this equity journey. There are going to be spots, of course, areas where different subgroups that you're working with, where there will be discomfort, but it's always that silver lining, of course, is that change happens when there's discomfort going on. So that's always the good thing. And again, it sounds like you have always created the space for people to speak their truth. Your governing team right here, you guys practice that. And we know how to accept and expect non-closure. You guys are on a journey. You have your short-term and long-term goals. And so it's going to take several years, a good 10 years it could be, before you actually see. But I always say the most important thing is, as long as you see some rippling in the water, it's like throwing that pebble. It may not be like you're throwing a boulder, but when you have the pebble, as long as there's some movement, then when you guys have your task force, you have your different subgroups that you're working with, as long as there's some movement there and the board staying informed, that's how you continue this work. So it's so important to have that space to be able to talk about this so important work. So again, we're going to focus on the governance core, the board assessment, which is that tool that you've seen several times. We're just going to focus in on one of the areas, and we will continue to talk about the board assessment because that's a tool that weaves through everything we do. We like to focus on the characteristics of being effective because that's what the governance is all about. And how does the role of the board and superintendent show up in these in this assessment? Even we're going to talk about with the book study. It talks a lot about the role of the board and the superintendent. And again, it's about building the culture where if your superintendent changes or if a board member changes, that the culture is already there in place where the other individuals will be able to come in and understand that this is how we govern as a team. So that is always important. So recentering the work, of course, you have your equity statement, the norms and protocols, you have your handbook. Like I said, you guys are very much far ahead than a lot of the groups that we're working with. But this is always a reminder of why we are doing this work. And you know, the equity policy, your priorities and your plan, you're following your goals. You've laid out your blueprint on how you're going to do this racial equity work, and just remembering the why, you know, the purpose of this and the process, and then the results of the work that you're doing. This is always just to help you stay centered on the governing work. Of course, the chapters that we've read, chapters 1 through 3. And so let's see what I want to do. So I'm going to bring you back for just really quick because I have to see your face to ask you this question. So the first 10 pages, that introductory, before we even get to chapter 1, what are your thoughts? There are some great gems in that, just the introduction of this book. So what are your thoughts? I had mentioned that I think is one of the well-written governance books that really help board members. What are your thoughts? How familiar were you? Of course, they use a lot of the examples, as you know, it's about in California. So more people in California are familiar with this book than others. But what's your thoughts about the first page 1 through 10, actually the introduction? Anything resonate with you? Any particular topic that it was discussed?
Well,
So,
I like, oh,
page-
sorry.
Go ahead.
You sure? Maybe we're going to say the same thing. Okay. I appreciated page 2 in the introduction, talking about unity of purpose and how it's so aligned with the CSBA. I forget what their visual is, pyramid. There's some kind of shape, but the CSBA's kind of basic tenets for a good governance by a board, and this is very well aligned with that. So I appreciated that. The introduction gave me a good chance to really think about and get over my own personal challenge sometimes with the word moral.
Okay.
So
we're going to talk a lot more about that. Yeah,
I had to ruminate on that a little bit, but it gave me a good kind of preparation then, before digging into chapter 1.
Good.
I think sometimes we all have little words that might pull in other meanings and other thoughts, and so that was a good one for me.
Okay, thank you for sharing.
Okay, I'm up. So on page 1, it's the quote, and the last line in the quote, "We the people govern ourselves." And so we've been getting a real big dose of that, depending on what board you're on, but we've got our little bit of a share of that. And so we have to remember that what our job is to make sure the children that come out of our schools are able to govern themselves. So there's that one. And then there's the definition of effective is a major expansion in capacity to bring about significant measurable improvements. And so when I read in here, and I use the word effective quite a bit, that's what I'm going to be always thinking is expansion of capacity. So that's kind of what I got out of this one.
Oh, great. Great pickup there. Absolutely. Who else?
I like the explanation about what coherence means and that it's kind of in contrast to alignment, which is the more rational aspect of things with goals and professional development, whereas coherence is the more emotional aspect and shared understanding.
Okay, shared up. Yep, absolutely.
Carolyn, you hit the nail right on the head. And so in my world, coherence is a kind of an agreement thing. So it's a reasonable exercise. In this book, every time I read coherence, it means emotion. So
Emotions.
it's good. I don't know why they do that, but it's confusing.
Yes, you picked up on that. Absolutely. The way they use coherence. Absolutely. Anyone else? What about you, Ted or Jen? What are your thoughts?
Nothing to add right now.
Okay. Nothing, Ted? And I don't want to overlook anyone.
No, I'm good. Keep going.
Okay. Okay. Just jump in anytime. I don't want to overlook anyone. Okay, just wanted to kind of see what your thoughts were on that. And Amanda, you mentioned this already, which is exactly what we should be focusing on. The vision is of a governance system, school board, and superintendent working together as a cohesive, unified team with a common vision and driven by a shared moral imperative. That's what unity of purpose is. That's what you're working at. It mentioned unity compared to, what was the other word that it mentioned when it talked about unity? Did you catch that? It said unified. How should the board you should have the board should be a unity there. It just makes a difference between it, but this is the unity of purpose of how you should be serving. That's the purpose of the board. Really working hard at that moral imperative, which we're going to talk about more. It will speak so much about moral imperative, but when you think about the mindset for efficacy, the growth examples I want to just show here compared to fixed versus a growth mindset, because it is about, even when we talked about the inverted triangle, changing the mindset, that mental model is so important. But we have fixed mindsets as well. And so here are just some examples of fixed mindset where we assume their temperament and the intelligence and level of creativity are innate characteristics that cannot change. Sometimes these are some fixed mindsets. Only believes that they have been successful with their performance or intelligence measures higher standards, leads to a belief that intelligence and talent are limited. Restrictions on the efforts and success. These are some research says that these are some of the fixed mindsets that we can tend to fall into if we don't really pay attention to that. Just look at the growth mindset, just the difference. You'll seek out the challenges and view failure as a chance to learn and build. It's been very difficult for board teams over the last couple of years. And have we missed the mark in some areas? Absolutely. But it's okay. It's a chance to learn. Recognize that their efforts influence their successes. All of the efforts, it's a positive thing. The efforts that you're doing will influence the successes. Spends more time practicing or learning, which leads to the higher levels of achievement. You practicing and researching and learning. All of these are growth mindset. These are examples of growth mindset. And just quick, I'm just going through these really quick to see if anything resonates with you. It's never too late. Things that we may say It's okay if I fail. I appreciate constructive criticism. I'm a lifelong learner. My results don't define me. These are all growth mindset examples when we're talking about mindset for efficacy. So just giving you some ideas, examples that you may be aware of, but think about some of the things that you may even say, and not recognize that those are growth mindset examples. And here are a few more. I'm not looking for others people's approval. I can see the big picture. I'm going to try a new approach. All of these are, of course, they're in the positive realm, but this work that we're doing can easily make us forget about, having these growth mindset characteristics. So this is just a reminder for you of what they look like in action. And this is, in the first chapter, it talks about different examples and helping us really understand what is actually the nature of governance. And I believe we perhaps shared this one with you before, but this is always an easy way to share with your community if they don't know, or anyone you're educating on the true responsibilities of the board. And it's just, of course, as you know, governance is steering the ship and management is rowing. Of course, setting the direction, the structure, accountability, both fiscally and programmatically. And it's always defining the big picture. And of course, the superintendent and his staff, focusing on how to implement the policy. This is the core governance of what governance truly is about. When you think about, you see, Ted, I have your name there first, and I'll tell you why. The 5 themes of governing that we, in chapter 1, just to make sure we're just connecting. Out of the 5 major themes of what good governance is all about, Ted, in your reading, and it's on page 18, when it talks about making a commitment to good governance. Are there any nuggets in there that you picked up on that you would like to share? Just, we're just having conversations about the books. I can't go into it deep into like I really would want to. We're just trying to get some nuggets on what does making a commitment to good governance mean to you?
And your question was off of page 18?
Yes, that's where, okay. Making a commitment. Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's see. I didn't mark up my book like you did, but there was some good points here. And I'm not going to try to read it over again.
No, just,
let's go ahead, I'll pass. Maybe I'll jump in.
I'll let you go. I'll swing back to you.
Thank you.
Sure, no worries. And it's not to put anyone on the spot. It's just, this is just how I train. I'm just used to doing this. And Amanda, here's yours. Just so happens, Amanda, look what you have. Moral imperative that drives the work of the school board, the superintendent, and the strategic direction of the district. What did you pick up? What resonated the most with you on that?
It was probably really just that there's a sentence sort of in the middle of page 19, but it's the moral imperative is about all children learning. And and I think if this board were marking that sentence up, we would probably italicize the moral imperative is about all children learning, because that's something that really comes up a lot with us, and particularly in alignment with this work. And for me, I'd always thought of morals as being really, really like deeply held personal beliefs. So it's hard to imagine, I get shared unity of purpose. I get that, but the thought of this board having like one moral imperative the wording of that was a little awkward to me, but putting it in those terms really, right? That's where we are. It always comes back to serving all students. So
Absolutely.
that's my takeaway.
Absolutely, and that is key. And I know some boards are using, because we use all the time, but does it mean something different if you say, if you replaced all with each child? You know, that makes it really focus more. This is what a superintendent had mentioned, that's the language he uses, because it really helps him center all children. He believes that, but it was like always a group to him. But when he said each child, it made him look at individual children. And so it's just a different way of doing that. So yeah, it's just kind of swapping out that, you know, all for each child, because you still have to focus on, and when you're having to make some very difficult decisions that perhaps the board may not be on the same page at the beginning, where you're having some dialogue about it, whatever can help you center on the children, I think will help you make the decision. And we'll move away from, yes, adults are very important in this. End of the day, we have to do what's best for the children, and first, and go from there. So yeah, thank you for that. And Jennifer, I really assigned you the third one: highly effective trustees and superintendents who have a governing, the governing mindset. But what are your thoughts about that section? Governance mindset to govern effectively.
Thanks. I think with this, I gravitate towards and enjoy the reminder of the systems mentality, and that there are a whole bunch of different pieces. And while each of us might have strength and a deeper understanding of certain elements within the functions of a school district, it really is, we're kind of, it's not our job to be, you know, the specific expert in one particular thing or in every single thing. It is our job to be a cohesive entity and govern. So I enjoy that systems aspect of it, and reminder that that it's the whole team approach.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate it. And Carolyn, you have the fourth one: effective school boards as coherence makers who govern with a unity of power.
Is it a power or purpose?
Well, it really should be a purpose. I don't know where the power came in.
That's similar to what Jen just mentioned.
Mhm.
There was this passage from the Long Beach Unified School District, and the last sentence says, unity of purpose helps them transcend their differences to fulfill a greater purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't mean that we can't have differences, but we have to find common ground, and we have to find a way to work despite our differences.
Mm-hmm. And that's key. You know, the board, this team, you know, just like with other boards, if you may have a really good cohesive team right now, and that's great, but I know it takes work to get there, and you have to work at it to sustain it too. And so it's always just remembering, you know, these are the major themes of what good governance is all about. We have to be intentional about it and reminding ourselves of what it takes, because you're one of five as a teammate. So Phil, what about you? The leadership from the middle. What nuggets did you pick up there? It's on page 21.
Nobody
Systems
cares about the middle managers, you know. So it's a problem in every organization, and that is the folks that are in there making it happen, you know, in the trenches, are the people who you should be listening to. But they, you know, may not be contributors to the bottom line, or their role may not be, they're a cog in a big machine and things like that. So back in the day, they started doing cross-functional teams, and everybody started figuring out like, oh, you do that? That's great. So the more that you can get out of the silo get those middle management folks and the experts. So they're not managers, but they know a lot. Once you can get them all in one room, you'd be surprised what could happen.
Absolutely. And you stated, you wrap that up. That's exactly the way it is. We tend to only have the same people coming to the table and missing the middle. And that's the powerful group in there. So you hone right in on that one. Absolutely. And so
Yeah,
Ted, I'm gonna swing back to you. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah,
It's the group that can't call in sick.
The group that can't call in sick, because you need them. You will learn that quickly, huh? Yes, go
okay,
ahead, Ted.
Thanks for circling around to me. I thought that was for TED Talks or something. So basically, on page 18, there is one sentence that kind of sums up, I believe, is good governance, is the board and superintendent together can be an essential force for equity, excellence, and achievement. And later in this book, somewhere, they talk about boards butting heads, and with the superintendent, there was a district, and a whole new board came in, and things started working. And I've seen other districts where not only the board, but the board and the superintendent are butting heads. And honestly, it's hard to have a good, you can't, a productive governance team when that happens.
You are spot on. And that's why it talks a lot. Like you said, it's woven on through this book, the importance of building a good, cohesive, and respectful relationship with your superintendent. Because with the board and the superintendent, you are a part of the governance team. So you have to work together and respecting each other's role. Absolutely. So that's why when we talk about that assessment tool that we use with you about the 8 characteristics, that's research-based. As saying, if you practice these, if you have these characteristics or you're working at it, research says it equates to an effective team. And so if the governing team at the top is running effectively and working effectively and cohesively with the superintendent, the chances increase that the district is going to be operating at a high level. So boards that you hear a lot about in the newspaper and all that, if you just go back to compare about some of the behaviors, sometimes, unfortunately, you'll get an understanding of why things are happening. And yes, there are a lot of other things that occur, but your behavior is a major, plays a major role in not being able to have a good governing team. So thank you for that.
Actually, you hear a lot of talk at CSBA. People spill their guts sometimes, and boy, you hear some crazy stories that happen. The boards out there.
Absolutely. Just last week, I actually attended the AASA, which is the superintendent's conference. So, oh boy, did I hear stories. I was just like a fly on the wall. And but yeah, very interesting. Of whatever, it's been a tough year. It's just been last 2 years or so. But I always remind the board that you guys know, even through COVID, the governing responsibilities did not change. You are still responsible to ensure that the district is running properly. So go ahead, Phil.
All I can tell you is there is a lot of coherence out there.
A lot of coherence out there. Emotion, yes, absolutely. And it's tugging at our hearts, but we've got to use this, that emotional intelligence. Absolutely. And so, Superintendent, did you have any thoughts about these major themes of good governance, because it impacts you?
Absolutely. Well, just grateful to be on a governance team that works so hard in all of these areas. But a particular part of this section that stood out to me, because we're working on it right now, is about vision statements or mission statements on page 19. That's something we're working on, updating a mission statement that's was done about 13 years ago and is really good. but we're looking at kind of infusing it with where we are now. And there's a section on page 19 that says, as it turns out, vision statements as statements of intent without being grounded in intensity of action have poor track records. Every district has a vision statement on paper, but few of them get realized in practice. And so right now, like I said, we're working on updating ours. And, this is my 6th year in the district. And, sometimes that's something a superintendent comes in right away and does, to revise the mission statement. And I've always thought that we'll know when the right time is to update that. And it felt like the right time this year because of a lot of the grounding work we've done with equity. And we call it a Kickstarter team, a mission statement Kickstarter team. And like immediately, that team without me needing to prompt it at all, attacked the mission statement and started adding in a lot of the equity work we did. We've been doing so that it's reflected in that mission statement. Right now, we just have a draft, but I guess my point is it's just all felt very natural. It hasn't forced like, oh, we got to get the word equity in our mission statement because that's a buzzword right now. It's just like, no, this is what we do. This is what we believe in. And so that part just really resonated with me because we're going through the process right now.
Absolutely. And when you look at the mission and vision, the mission of the school district doesn't change. Your mission is to educate all children. And then you add all the flowery words. Now, what can change is the vision, because that is the way of which you're going to do it. That is the statement that, of course, all of the equity work, your equity journey, the vision statement, you have to really look at that to say, okay, our vision on how we're going to get there, because the mission of education is to educate children, and so it is the vision. So simultaneously you look at those, absolutely. And some individuals haven't looked at their vision or mission statement for 30 years, and then you're trying to do all these changes and it's contradicting. So your community should be able to look at your vision and say, this is the way we're going to get here. All of this equity journey. So they should marry each other, at some point, and absolutely. So that's all a part of the work that you guys are currently in. Every aspect of your district is being pulled in, and which is the best way to do it. You can't just have one area. And so because of the time frame, because really if I was in person with you, which hopefully we will be, I don't know if we are next month, we will go into breakout groups, but you're still going to have some homework. So on page 11 in your workbook, what I need you to, because we've kind of talked about it, but I want to be able to go into the other chapters as well. But on page 11 is the beginning in your big workbook. On that following page, page 12, what your homework is going to be is to select 2 of those quotes that really resonate with you, and then write your rationale on why. And when you have this workbook, this is to help you go back and refer back. These quotes, some of the quotes we've kind of touched a little bit. That's why I wanted you to just read those 5 governance areas. But your homework will be, and you have until the next time we meet, to fill out, at least 2 of those quotes and your rationale about why you selected those. And that will just help keep you connected with and really understanding the critical importance of, the governance core and the moral imperative. That's that connector. And when we are together to do the next set of chapters, the first thing I will do is say, so share your homework with me. So we'll continue to talk about it, because I have some other activities for you to keep going in the book. And so, and I wanted to move these. I think this is out of order, but I will just look at the guidelines, of course, for serving on the board. As you guys, you know this, but again, it's okay to be reminded. Reserving judgment, listen empathetically, you stay focused on the content and not behavior. I mentioned to you before, a lot of boards who could get in trouble, it is because of behavior. And so you won't listen to, you will judge people. That's your behavior. And always be true to your norms, what's in your handbook, how you say you are going to engage with each other and your superintendent and his staff. And then we don't take our differences personally. You all are very unique. You have different lived experiences, and you bring all of that talent to the table. And so, yes, it's been a very tough couple of years, but there will be other things that will challenge you in making your decisions that you may not all agree on. But how do you work through those differences and it not becomes personal at all? How do you do that? And so that's what it looks like when you are conducting yourself in a very cohesive, effective team. So those are just guidelines for serving on the board. When we talked about it in chapter 2, this is probably one of my favorite ones too. When we talk about, again, the mindset, what we think, the values that we have, what are your lived experience? What are your belief systems that you bring to the board table? Because that is who you are. You're bringing your whole self. And then our behaviors. How do these things intersect with our decision making? And the four key ones that we're going to talk about again, and we'll go deeper into the strategic thinking, strategic focus, the deep learning, and the manner in which you operate. That's the trustee's mindset. So the first one was the moral imperative, talking about the unity of purpose. This particular chapter, as you read, is focusing on trustees, your mindset. And I'll actually helping you think about, do I have the capacity to govern? Again, this is the framework of what governance is about, strategic thinking, the big picture. That's what you're to focus on. And how to be in strategic thinking, connect with all of the equity work that you're going to continue to do. You want to look at the big picture. You're making decisions that will impact children 2, 3, 4 years down the road. So you are required to be very strategic in your thinking and focus. And that deep learning, of course, is a deep dive, research, read your material, and so that you have that governing mindset. So what I want to share with you, being aware and understanding the impact of every variable that affects the health of your district. So when you think about it, always keeping the board's focus on children. We talked about that a few minutes ago. Watching your budget, being good stewards of the budget, of course. This is, again, having that governance mindset, staying focused on what you're responsible for. Focus on the long-term range goals for the organization. Building and maintaining that strong governance infrastructure, having the cohesive team together, and maintaining it, sustaining it, putting your protocols and your norms in place to be able to sustain it. Supporting the staff and creating that positive organizational culture. Having the culture is so important that if the Board of Education is creating that culture, the staff, the students can see it being modeled at the board level. So you will always be able to, you always know that students are watching you. So what are you modeling? Whether it's when you're having a very intense conversation at the board meeting, when you don't agree, what are you modeling though? You can still have discourse, you can still engage and not agree, but you're handling it in the most professional way. Holding the organization accountable to the community it serves. Anyone engaged in educating children should be held accountable. And as a board, as you know, you were elected to be that conduit between the community and the school district. So keeping your community informed. You guys have your task force in place. You're engaging different stakeholders. So you are doing this, but this is just a reminder that this is having a governance mindset when you stay focused on engaging your community. Keep the constituents informed and up to date on the work. And you know, as a reminder too, the students are really the constituents. They're just not old enough to vote for you. So how are you engaging them, keeping them informed? And with your equity journey, there's definitely student voice involved, which is so important as well. And so for defining the governance mindset, the core understanding of the basic principles of governance, these 4 areas, again, is the core of what governance really is about. So systems thinking, you can just unmute yourself. This starts on page 33. On systems thinking, what nuggets did you pick up in the book that talks about systems thinking for board members? What resonated the most with you? They had some great stories, especially like the helicopter story. Anyone want to share on systems thinking?
You mean and the balcony story of the dancing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciated that that as well. With the sometimes you can get mired in just like one small detail, but really just stepping back in the entire system. I love systems thinking and so yeah, that was a fun story.
Yeah, operating at the macro level. We forget about that because we hear about that all the time. Yep, I know. We're back to do. We don't do day to day, but do we sometimes fall below at times? And it's really about connecting the dots, right? Understand the big picture. And anyone else, any one of these categories: systems thinking, strategic, folk, deep learning, or manner.
I just like this this quote that said, "The need is to put out that fire as quickly as possible. That is not the job of governance. It is the job of the experts hired specifically to handle the problem." That
Absolutely.
Nicely.
Absolutely. The fire, about the fire truck, the actual fire. Yeah. Making immediate micro. Yes.
So where I got in chapter 1 that there's no I in team, in this chapter, it was the 30,000 foot view.
It is, yes. But when you hear that, when you're in any type of training and they keep saying the 30,000, the 10,000 foot view, you can see everything, but you want to do something. How do you keep yourself from, because you have the skill set to do it. You know how to put out a fire. How do you refrain from that? And this is just outlining the difference of the roles, right? What the superintendent, allowing your superintendent to, as long as he's equipped with all of the equipment to put out the fire, but the board understands that there's a fire over there.
Yeah, I see a conflict though with that 30,000 foot view and a deep learning thing. So now I've done the deep learning, but I really can't say anything because I don't want to micromanage.
No, well, go ahead.
It's funny because I was actually going to say, I feel like the connection between those two is the deep learning really helps you deeply understand the connections, right? So when you're at the macro level and you're seeing from up above how everything is connected, you really can't understand that with getting the deep learning and getting all of the reports from the staff. And Trustee Ted has been doing this awesome thing recently where he's had the opportunity to go and tour some of our school sites with the superintendent and principals, right? So we put in that work and we receive all of this information, which then helps us do the systems thinking at the macro level. So rather than trying to put out the fires, we at least, when we're doing the analysis after, we have that deep understanding of how all of the various pieces are connected, and then we can ask questions about governance policy moving forward.
Absolutely. What are you thinking? What are you thinking, Phil? I see the smile on your face. What are you thinking?
Well, okay, so we've had some discussion about the achievement gap, and hopefully that'll get on the agenda. But as I dig down into that, there's some fundamental things going on that should be discussed, but is that now micromanaging?
It's not micromanaging. It's just how do you ask the question? So are you asking like, how are you doing this? Or is there a process in place, superintendent, to address X, Y, Z?
More like, why are we doing this?
Okay, you have one of those why questions. Okay, and well, you could ask the superintendent to explain the process, because when you're asking him to explain the process, that is his why.
No, but see, I know that. I know the
Oh,
process.
you know.
Yeah, public education has been doing this thing for, 100 years or more. And so it's pretty kind of like set. So, but why is it being done the way it is? We've been doing this all this time. Look at the results year after year after year. It's the same thing. So why?
Or what is the plan? What do you have in place if you're doing it all the time and not getting the results that you need, then there are questions you can ask on. The data is telling us that it's not working, obviously. It could be. So what's the plan, superintendent, we're trying to get here. So what's your plan to get here?
Oops.
Oops.
No, that's not where I'm going with this.
Okay.
I think that as a board, we need to have this discussion. We need to come to the realization that this is what's really going on, and then figure out a way how we can do what we want to do within the confines of this structure.
And I'm hearing you, but this is what the conversation that you're having with your superintendent as well, because perhaps he has more information that will help you. But so the board needs to engage him, your superintendent, so that he may be able to share additional information with you. What do you say, Scott?
I think it's a very interesting topic, and sometimes this, delineation between what's the board's role and what's the superintendent and his staff's role is, it's kind of made to be like this very clear, definitive line, and sometimes it's very nuanced. And I think comes down to relationships and like the willingness to be comfortable with each other, kind of butting up against the line a little bit sometimes. One particular aspect that kind of comes to mind as a crucible for this is summer school. And I'm thinking of Phil especially, but the board as a whole is, for years now, we've made a commitment to summer school as a vehicle to, augment some of our students who may be struggling for one reason or another, as a matter of equity, to have access to summer school where not all of our students have access to summer school. And Phil is, I think, infamous in a good way for asking, well, what's the data? Is summer school working? Right. And so I think maybe that's just an example of the push and pull for a board member to be able to push and say, yeah, we're having summer school. Show me the data. Show me the data that is impacting, that is closing the achievement gap. And for the superintendent and his staff to be able to say, like, well, sometimes it's just access, and sometimes there will be data that's very, visible to be able to show that it is making a difference. So sometimes it's more subtle. This relationship is more subtle than sometimes it appears in, in writing in a book or something.
Yeah. And something that has to also be happening when you're having conversations like this is that board members are trusting your education expert. Not saying that board members are not educated. I am never saying that. What I am saying is that in the position that you're in as governing body, you are not the education expert. And so you have to trust that your superintendent and his staff knows what to do. Once the board has posed the big questions on and shares the expectations of what you want to happen, and then the superintendent sharing how it's going to get done. And of course, monitoring, there has to be some type of data. Why are we doing this? Because if it's not working, we may need to shift, or we may need to do something totally different or stop doing. So absolutely.
And so I will add that, we have been having to deal with this lethal plague for the last couple of years. And so there's some issues that, have a priority. And so questions about, big general philosophies about education are not really on the front burner right now, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, hopefully we'll get to a spot where we can, be philosophical about this stuff, but right now it's, mask on.
Yeah, and you're right about that. And hopefully that's the direction we're going, because whether we're in this pandemic or not, you still have to educate children to the best of your ability. So when are we going to start talking about educating children again? And so the board, that's where the board is. Your agenda is your meeting. Are you going to ease something on that agenda to start talking about? Yes, we're going to always probably for a while masking or virtual or whatever, but you create your agenda, and as collectively, what does the board collectively, what do you need to talk about? What is your data telling you need to focus on? What are your priorities that you should be focusing on? What you laid out a whole your journey for this whole equity or things that you're going to talk about. You have your LCAP, you have your strategic plan, I believe. What are your goals? Those are things that you should be talking about at the board table. If you have work sessions, study sessions, however you want to call them, is where you can have a deeper dive into some of the other topics that potentially will, end up being an actionable item.
And so now that brings us to manner. And so the manner is, guess what? You got to have some patience.
Could I ask a question related to that? Just trying to understand. So if there is a question that a board member has that has to do with maybe things that are done in other places that seem to be working better, what would be the best way to discuss that? Would that be just one-on-one meeting with Scott, or bring it as an item for the whole board to discuss? Like, what's the most just the best way to do it so that there's no surprises, or that just people have time to think, to process?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it could be, if there's something that you've learned, just like the example you use, there's nothing wrong with you having a one-on-one with your superintendent. And it is a discussion. Your superintendent knows that he has 5 bosses, if you will. And so he can't, one board member, of course, is not going to give him a directive to do anything with that information. But you can have your one-on-ones. You can engage your board president to say, is this something that collectively this board needs to talk about? Your one-on-one may satisfy you with Scott, but if it's something that the whole board will need to have a discussion about, whatever your protocol is in your handbook or your norms, do you engage your board president? How do you go about getting something put on the agenda? Because you're right, you don't want anyone to be surprised. You don't want your superintendent to be surprised. But that could be some homework, some work that's being done away from the board table, that a one-on-one, a phone call, could probably address those issues. And if it seems to be something that is bigger, your superintendent will know that this is something that the entire board, we need to discuss. And then when he's working closely with your board president, creating your agenda, that's how it ends up getting there for discussion. You use your work sessions to go a deeper dive into the topics. But we always want to make sure that the topics are something that's going to end up being an actionable item, because that's what you're doing. When you're at the board table, you are handling the business of the board. If there's something that you're just interested in, which is okay, those are different types of conversations. The whole board may not be interested in it. And so again, Scott was kind of nodding his head. Doesn't seem like he minds having one-on-ones with each board member. What do you say, Scott?
Oh, no, I agree with you 100%. Always, try to be as accessible as possible. And sometimes, members of the board are connected to the community in a way that I'm not, and can really shed light on a topic. And a one-on-one kind of discussion can often also shed light on differences between different districts and the amount of resources and that sort of thing that perhaps, a board member is not as keyed into as, a staff would be. So I think those are great ways to develop our unity of purpose.
Right. And do you have a standing time that you meet with each board member?
We've done it different ways over the years. Initially, I did have those times built into the calendar, and it proved sometimes effective and sometimes not effective. So currently, it's on a as needed basis.
As needed, yeah. And that's fine. So does that help you, Carolyn?
No, it does. It's very helpful. I guess my follow-up question is, how does a board member know if they're getting into the weeds? Like, would it be appropriate for the superintendent then to tell them this is?
Yes. And you guys should be okay with that. Absolutely.
I don't know. Maybe sometimes we think we're being helpful, and maybe we're not.
Right. And you may have information that you just want to share and thought, I didn't know if you know this, but you could give him information, but then just don't tell him what to do with it. And it should be okay. The superintendent should be comfortable enough with you guys to say, I hear you. I'm very much aware of it. And I'll follow back up with everybody else, but I've got it, basically. Well, absolutely. Because your intention is not to come in there and try to tell them what to do. You just want to be able to share the information that you have, and that's okay. But that's that two-way communication and respect for each other, that you're going to be okay with him saying, of course, no, don't go and talk to my staff. I will handle it, or unless I say it's okay. That's just that respect that you have, but absolutely. Start with one-on-one with him, and you're building a relationship with him where you'll be comfortable enough to know that even he can probably don't even have to say anything. It could be a facial expression. You're like, okay, I'm towing the line a little bit, because there's no malice intended. So that's how you build those good relationships. So absolutely, board members can ask the superintendent anything they want to. I always say that. Anything they want to, period. Now I say to the board member, why are you asking? So if you have a good reason to be asking, especially if it's going to require him and his staff to get you some data and all of that, it should be something that the whole board is interested in. But if it's something that you're just interested in, that you just want to know more about, that's okay too. But just know that it's not top priority. That's all. That's what governing looks like. That's governing in action. Because yes, you can ask those questions because he is your education expert. There are a lot of things that are happening every single day that the board doesn't even know about. And that's okay. That's what you hire him to do, to have octopus arms with him and his staff to put out these fires. But any superintendent knows that if it is going to bubble to the top to get to the board, he's going to let you know. And you just have to trust that he's handling that. So if it's a kindergartners were fighting, he does not need to let every board member know that 2 5-year-olds were fighting. He does not need to let you know that. If you happen to find out, that's okay. His staff is handling that. So again, these are the things that just happen, but keeping in the mind, mindset of what governing is. You guys are that big picture, systems thinking, being strategic. That deep learning, again, is doing your research, digging deep, so that when you have those conversations and the superintendent and staff give you more information, you're connecting the dots. You're connecting all those dots. And the manner in which you do it in a very respectful way, and how you're engaging with each other, and how you engage with your superintendent. Superintendent can't have 5 different ways, of course, to communicate with the board. You have to agree on what's the best way to communicate. And once one board member is asking for something, guess what? Everybody's going to get it. Everybody's getting it. And so after a while, you're going to start talking to each other like, Amanda, why did you ask for this? And but again, you guys can talk to each other like that without putting the superintendent on the spot. So absolutely, but as you can see in the book, it goes so much deeper that, again, this is a tool that will really help you. It's nothing that another book just to put on the shelf, you know. And superintendent, on page 43, I always like to just say this, those 6 C's, that is a really good to go through with your administrative staff. When I was talking to another superintendent, they said, well, let's add celebration on that to make it 7 C's. But just to go through that, talking about the character, the citizenship, collaboration, communicating, creativity, and that critical thinking, that is just learning those global competencies will be a great exercise for you and your staff.
Yeah, I could see that as a poster blown up to have posted in different places around the district. And I love the idea of adding celebration.
Yeah,
that's so important, especially right now when everybody is just working up to and past their capacity. And that's a great page. And I really like the communication piece, because what we find over and over again is you can do so much good work, but if it's not communicated properly,
if it's not communicated, absolutely. So again, I will send you guys an email to remind you of this. Your other homework assignment is going to be on page 27 that we're not going to go through right now because we really, for time limitations, since we just have the 2 hours, but this will help you understand those areas that we just talked about briefly about the systems thinking. You know, it's like, so here's the what of it. Now, so what? You jot down the implications of each section, and then now what? You know, what are ways that the elements can be applied to the work of the board? So this is how you're making sure that you're staying connected with systems thinking, strategic focus, and the deep learning. So chapter 3 is what I wanted to make sure I get to. Superintendent governance mindset. So do you guys know what type of superintendent that you have? Scott, you said you've been there 6 years. Okay. And so here you are, Scott, you're in the hot seat. Okay. And so we're going to think about what type of, the typical governance style. This is how you can share with us what type of style do you have dealing with your governance team, Scott?
Well, that's a great question. Definitely not keeping them in the dark. I would hope that it's a thoughtful, analytical, and purposeful manner.
A purposeful approach.
I may be biased.
I was gonna say, what say the board? Thumbs up. Very purposeful. Superintendent, keeping you informed. And so your purposeful approach, let's say there is a third way that superintendents approach governance in their district. It is not coincidental that superintendents who have long, productive tenures, some with large, complex districts, approach governance in a thoughtful, analytical, and purposeful manner. And this is for the survival of superintendents. You definitely don't want to disrespect the board and be hands-off or just, damage control. You want to be purposeful. You're respecting their role and being a superintendent. And so starting on page, and I'll see how fast we can do this, but I have a reading assignment for you. If you're familiar, and I think Carolyn, one of you guys already mentioned, there was very good examples of superintendent stories, purposeful superintendents stories in this book. And so as you see where your name is, if you could just look on that page, and this is to help your superintendent. You could just glance at it if you've already kind of highlighted some areas. You can just jump in and share with your superintendent based upon these examples of purposeful superintendents that are highlighted in this book. What would you share with your superintendent that either he is doing well or that is something he can add to his arsenal to continue to do a great job? This is to help your superintendent. And so anyone, Amanda, if you're ready, you can jump in on yours was on page 60. Anyone if you're ready to just, if you have some points highlighted, you can jump in and share with your superintendent. Go ahead, Phil.
So the kind of story stuff is great and uplifting, but I will tell you, I have seen Scott on more than one occasion do exactly those three things.
Really?
And in fact, in that order. In a difficult situation, working with people and groups that are very coherent, he is able to address them in that manner. And yes, Scott's in the hot seat, but I swear to God, it looks like a chill seat after he's doing his thing.
So you're saying that he does a hands-off? I'm talking about with the board. How does he engage you guys?
Well, he has to deal with me. I mean, that's enough right there.
I was waiting for you to admit that. Anyone else on any of these stories? Any nuggets there that you really like that Scott can either he's currently doing or he can put in his arsenal?
I think we need to have a 12-member board like in Greenville County. I mean, how do you have a 12-member board of trustees? That's insane.
It
a lot of different minds. But honestly, what a couple sentences out, well, down there it says, he believes in the importance of keeping the board fully informed, engaged with truthful information. And I know Scott gives us truthful information. In fact, he admits when he made a mistake, which is not often that he has, but he is open with the board and truthful with the board.
Mm-hmm.
And either, we work as a board with him to fix it, but he feels, which is good, he feels comfortable coming forward instead of hiding things, and then, things could explode with that. So basically, an example with Greenville County Schools is that truthful information. And I think that's what Scott really brings to us.
And I'm so glad, Ted, that you brought that out, because when you're reading that, you would think, oh, that's obvious. But, and I'm sure your superintendent can know stories of, it's not always happens this way, where some may choose to just give boards a lot of information and maybe omit some things,
I try to take the good, bad, and ugly approach, and I'd rather have them hear the bad and the ugly from me, because it's a very small community, and I know they will hear it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Anyone else?
Sure. My favorite though wasn't what I was assigned, but
Okay,
I think
sorry.
it might be Carolyn. So sorry, Carolyn, but mine was page 60, and right, the key ones I'd highlighted there was keeping the board up to date on key strategic issues. Of course, all of these really focus on ensuring trust and full transparency and honesty, and none of that is ever an issue with us, and Scott does a really excellent job in those areas. I liked though on the Vancouver Public Schools, so those three key points I just think are kind of hallmark. So I'm sorry, Carolyn, because it's in your section, but the timely two-way communication and authentic engagement with the board commitment to internal and external public engagement in cultivating a hopeful vision. And I think that's really kind of where we are also in doing the work around the mission and vision statement, and kind of centering the board back to that when we have that on our table. And then the agreement on our governance team values, expectations, protocols, and evaluations. So I broke the rules a little bit, but I think that was just like the perfect nutshell description for me.
Excellent. Excellent.
I'll take yours, Amanda.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Long Beach, one passage says to develop an understanding of the why of each program, and I think Scott does that really well with us. And also that we'll never read something in the newspaper that you haven't forewarned us about, and that we are expected to participate and provide advice and counsel. So we know that we're all always very active and doing our homework and participating.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So what are your thoughts about these stories about superintendents, purposeful superintendents, Scott? What are your?
Well, I guess, they're great stories to read and learn from, because, definitely in this position, you can always get better, that's for sure. So I like having the practical examples. Makes me very grateful to work with a board that we can have a very honest give and take back and forth. And, like as Carolyn said, I always, accentuate that this board is, really exceptional at doing their homework and being prepared for board meetings and everything. And that makes the two-way, engagement about really important issues meaningful. And then I just have to say, like for this chapter, the very first quote on page 53 just really resonates with me. And it's interesting that it comes from Paul Bear Bryant, a football coach in the South, who there may have been some equity issues, at a different time and place there, but that quote is just something that really resonated with me. And I hope that I try to lead by, both with the board and with the organization, that if anything goes bad, I did it. If anything goes semi-good, then we did it. If anything goes real good, then you did it. And that's what it takes to win, in his case, football games, but in our case, an organization where all stakeholders are really given the opportunity to be a part of the process. I love that quote. I'd never heard it before, so I really appreciated that.
It is, and I'm sure your staff would love you to say that quote to them too. If it goes bad, you take the blame, because the board is going to hold you accountable, and that's okay, because they're going to work hard to make sure that you look good as well. And so again, this is just helping you just really focus on what true governance is about. You really have the opportunity all the time to just focus on what is governing. We get the job. It is minimal requirements to get the job, but you have to really do a lot in order to do an effective job. And so until required training is required legislatively, then it's on the job training. That's what it is. But when you're dedicated, like I know this group is, your team is, this is just a friendly reminder of how do you support your superintendent, your only staff person. You want him to be successful. So you're going to make sure that he understands what your expectations are. He's learning how to engage with you. The board can change at any point, and then he has to get to know new board members. One change on the board can impact the entire, all the dynamics of the board team. And so your superintendent has to find a way to make sure that he builds good relationships one-on-one, and then collectively, how does he work with the board? So I'm so pleased, I didn't doubt that you had a purposeful superintendent. You guys would not be able to have your equity journey if you did not have a purposeful superintendent, unapologetically doing the work that needs to be done, which is so important. And so those are the first 3 chapters. And like I said, I'll remind you of some homework, because I just want you to have this information in your workbook to refer back to. some of the districts that I work with on doing the book study, they will take some of the topics and have work sessions on them to really dive deeper into it. So that's just a thought that you could potentially do once we finish the book, because we are really doing a really quick and dirty study of this, not real in depth, but you do have the book. So what I wanted to, and I know you can't read this, I just wanted to remind you, this is what, number 3 on this tool that you've seen several times, and I'm going to pull us back on this, but I wanted to remind you, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about collaborative relationships. And remember, that's number 3. Our school board has collaborative relationships with the superintendent, with staff, as well as the community through a strong communication structure to inform and engage both the internal and external stakeholders in setting and achieving the district's goals around equity. And so again, this is a self-assessment that we've shared with you, and we'll continue to touch areas. But tonight, I just wanted to kind of chat about the number 3, that collaborative relationships. And I'm going to pull you back to me just so that we can kind of talk about that. Have you been having some, what's going on in this area with you? How do you think you're doing in this area of collaborative relationships with your stakeholders and with each other? Any challenges you've had? Go ahead, Phil.
I'll just talk about scope. So I started out doing this stuff, a while ago. And back then, and Scott, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but the phrase was in education, no news is good news. And yeah, see, and so we are so far past that now that every time there's even a little bit of ink in a newspaper, I'm thinking we're doing better. We're doing better.
Okay. And any other thoughts, comments?
All right. Sorry, I'm like, we need to wear glasses on top of my contact lenses. So I'm staring at my screen so I can read that that section there about the collaborative relationships. And if we're kind of doing a little snapshot assessment on how we're doing, the focus here really is on the strong communications structure to inform and engage. That was such a critical one, in my opinion, probably the most critical need we had when we hired Scott. And that was a key focus in our superintendent search, was rebuilding relationships, having strong communication within the team, with the community as a whole, building trust, all of that. And so I think we're really solid there. I think that a lot of really hard work has been put in, particularly with building up the relationships and having good levels of trust with all of the various stakeholders, and then strengthening it with repeated, clear communications and just continuing to build on the ways that we do reach out to the various groups. So I see that as really solid.
Okay.
I'll just add in, I know when I came on board, a real focus point was the community forum as an avenue. I mean, it's only a singular event, so it's just a point in time, but I think the commitment that the board had to that and that we've had to it over the years has symbolized the fact that we do want engagement with the community. We do want to hear their input and learn from that. So it's only a particular example, but I think it's a good example of something that the board has been really consistent in valuing. And it's an annual event where, we invite members from the community in, all the administrators in the district, talk a little bit about what's going on in each department, and we invite the community's feedback in. And so it's a natural connection to our LCAP. So just one specific example.
That is awesome. Now I'm going to share with you just what it looks like in action. And you guys mentioned some areas where you think about fostering a transparent governance culture when all governance team members receive consistent information from multiple platforms and from staff. Again, we're talking about collaborative relationships with not only external, but internal. And so making sure it's transparent. And when I mentioned before, when one board member gets some information, everybody gets it. From the staff and things of that nature. Communicating your goals and your priorities and your actions, like you said, to your stakeholders. You guys your responsibility is to educate the community, keeping them informed. Communicate the equity statement through multiple communication platforms. There has been even suggestions on different versions of it, like having a kid-friendly one, either an animated, or what if there was just if you had to have a visual of what equity means in your district, what would that look like? And perhaps the kids can draw, they can tell you, they may be able to have a contest. If you had to have a visual, what would it look like? And so again, so instead of saying, well, read this whole document that we have, how do we make it kid friendly or just friendly to people who don't want to read 6 pages, So just thinking about this, that's what it looks like in action, providing direction on the development and the evolution of a district's communication plan about equity, establishing the protocol and that culture again with the superintendent on effective implementation of decisions that are made by the district. So what is that messaging? When decisions are made, when that gavel is hit, then what? What does it look like? The ball is starting to roll, and then the superintendent needs to be able to communicate that to his staff. And then the board, again, whether you're just say if you had a 3-2 vote and you're on the 2 side, once, of course, the gavel is hit, it is the will of the board, and then you act accordingly. We don't have to go back and say, well, nope, there's no well. We had great deliberation. We had really spirited discussions about it. But once the gavel is hit, and it's the will of the board, and the board should be acting accordingly. So that the superintendent is not like, well, should I not, because the board is being, nope, once the decision is made, then the superintendent knows to take that directive on with his staff. You leverage, of course, like you're already doing, you have that task force. That is very important because you can't do this all by yourself. You guys have really positioned yourself to have groups where there should be no one in your community who would say, I didn't get a chance to participate. You didn't ask me. It seems like you have many platforms of allowing feedback and continue to allow feedback. People can, have comments at your board meetings. So again, this is how you are building a collaborative relationship. You have your listening sessions to provide that space for community and stakeholders to discuss any challenges associated with this equity work. And so it's not that you don't want to hear it. You do want to hear from your community because we don't have all the answers. But when you listen to other individuals, and you may learn of or hear something that you just never thought of that perspective, because perhaps you don't have that lived experience. And so that's why, again, the importance of this team to listen to each other because you are bringing different experiences to the table. Your lens is a little bit different, but the lens collectively is one and the same, that shared moral imperative that the board has too. And so I'm glad that you feel that you really have this, because it's important that relationship, that collaborative relationship, and that strong communications, because you can be doing a lot of great work and it could be a well-kept secret. No one knows about it because you're not sharing the information. And then allow the staff, what avenues do they have, superintendent, have you created for your staff to continue to share in the stories that the board, whatever the directives are or the expectations are, what are you creating for your staff to be able to carry that torch on from the central office and to the building principal? Will you go to different buildings and think that you're in different districts? Or why do I feel this way in this building, but I don't in this building? When we're focusing on equity, the key thing is that it should not be it should be seamless. Because just thinking if one child was at one building and had to go to another building for whatever reason, is it going to be a shock to them? You know, so what's good over here, if we know all the wonderful things that are going on in this building, well, that's great. Now, how do we replicate that over here? You know, it can't just be, we got a phenomenal building principal over here. Well, that phenomenal building principal need to get with these other principals, because we're going to have a phenomenal building principals in every building, because you are creating the best experience in educating the children, so that when it comes to graduation, they will be able to say that you guys did a great job. You have prepared us to be competitive globally, college or career, or just life skills, you know, so that those could be your wins. And usually graduation is the most important time, because you want to celebrate. But I always like to say, kind of have that thought in your mind, how well have we prepared them? Could we do something different? And there's always room to make some adjustments, and it's not punishing anyone, but what can we do different? Because the kids are telling us that perhaps when I did go to college, I really wasn't prepared. Higher ed is saying to K-12 what's going on. They're not as prepared. You know, so are we thinking of a K-16 education? Are we thinking about that for kids? Looking beyond, making sure that I always think it should be grade 13. That it should be that transitional year, because, you know, do you really know what you want? Because you're 18, that you know what you want to do in life. I didn't. You know, I know all of you guys knew exactly what you wanted to do. You just don't know. So that 13th year is helping them decide, well, perhaps they want to go into the military, you know, and that's okay. But life skills. So, you know, doing this equity work, we have to make sure from pre-K all the way up, making sure that you're making the best decisions for these kids. And you can only do that when you have a stronghold on what effective governing is really about, how you're engaging with each other, how you are supporting your superintendent and his staff to be successful. Because if your superintendent seat really was like that hot seat I showed you that Scott was in, and nobody could stay sitting in there, after a while, I will have to say, it's you, board. It's not the superintendent. If that seat is a revolving door, it's not that person who is the education expert, who is credentialized. It's the Board of Education. So this is where I have many examples of that, and I've been able to say that to the board, and it's because they did not know their role. But I'm a true believer that majority of boards, once they learn, they will do better. But it's not required for them to know. Anyway, just get the job. 18 years of age, popular enough to be elected. You can be brilliant or not and be on the board. But the key thing is, wherever you are, if you choose to do this work, just learn what your role is so that you can support the education expert and his staff or her staff, so that the kids are reaping the benefits. Because at the end of the day, it is all about the children, each child, and the decisions that you're making. And I'm not just preaching to you. I just really believe this. And it's always like to remind board members of the work you do is so important. It is very impactful. And I always want you to think about what's going to be your legacy. What decisions are you making that's going to be attached to you? What's the legacy of how you are moving forward, moving this district forward in this whole equity journey? You may not see all the fruits of your labor that you're doing, but you are laying the foundation, which is so important to lay that foundation. You can build a beautiful home, but if you didn't pour the cement to have that foundation, it's just going to be a beautiful home until the storms come, right? And so that's what goes back to that ripple in the wall, just to make sure that you are shoring up, doing what you're supposed to do as a governing team, so that the superintendent and his staff can do the work, because they have been doing equity work. The key thing is we are being more intentional about calling it out. So it's not that teachers have never paid in. No, this is the work they do. We're just being more intentional. At areas where we're missing the mark, we're just going to write that a little bit. Everybody's going to shift because we're being very intentional and calling it out, but then equipping individuals with the tools to do a great job. It's not throwing everyone out with the bathwater, if you will, giving individuals the tools they need to be successful. Yes, Phil, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I would have hoped that the authors would have included something about stewardship, because the 35,000 foot view is that we have a community, institution in our hands right now, and we're going to pass that off to the next set of board members. And so that to me is also part of governance, is that we're the keepers of this for the moment. And so we need to preserve it. And what do the scouts say? Leave it better than you found it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Jen, did you have a question?
I have to leave. I'm gonna sing happy birthday before my son's bedtime. Thank you.
Absolutely. 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 You're right. Stewardship is so important. Phil, I really appreciate you saying that. Shoring up that foundation so that if a whole new board comes in, it will not disrupt it. You are doing things to sustain this, because the work is so important, and you're staying focused. You're not being distracted, because you want sustainability. You can have all these documents to say this is what we plan to do, but if it can't stand the times of pushback, then why do all this work? And so that's why it's so important of really committing to it, working collaboratively together as a governing team, understanding what your role is compared to the superintendents. You remember that governance clock, the authority of the board is up here and superintendent and staff is below, but it is a clock, it's circular. So it just continues, you support each other. So just keeping that in mind will help boards be effective no matter what you are going to be faced with, because the last 2 years, the pandemic, do know it's going to be something else. We just don't know what it is. It will be something else that's going to challenge your decision-making. Perhaps people won't be pleased with some decisions that you have to make, but you have been elected to represent your community and make the best decision that you can based upon the information that you have. And so,
can I throw something in there? Actually, at the very beginning of the book, what really stuck with me was governance is derived from a Greek word, whatever that is, I don't remember, but to steer the ship. And that's basically, that's what we're doing. we're governance is steering the ship.
Absolutely.
Now, do all of us have a hand on the wheel? The president's the pilot.
Yes, and then, but if the
captain, if the ship goes down, she's going down too, right? she's going to be the last one standing, right? I'll bring up a lot of metaphors. You hear that, Amanda? But no, that's actually true. That's we're steering the ship.
You're steering it.
You can see, yeah.
Absolutely. And just like when you're thinking about in the ball of steering a ship, where it takes just one person can really hold it. But if you have everybody just making sure, like, whoa, do you see us going over here? And Amanda's like, oh my gosh, I was looking over there. So that's what the team effect is. And management is going to row. Now you visualize, what does it look like if management is rowing one way and you're steering another way? You're going in circles.
Yeah.
It's not going to go anywhere. So again, that's the quick version of going through the book. And again, I utilize this book as your tool. We'll continue to go through the next several ones, chapters when we meet next month. And so I'm going to turn this back over to you, Amanda and Scott, and thank you again for taking the time to out of your busy schedules to focus on your board governance learning opportunities. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I also really appreciate your time and your guidance here. I will take us back to the agenda. Board members, if you have anything else you want to say at this time, go ahead and just, raise your hand up or unmute yourself. I know we've had plenty of time to talk, but it's our time. Anyone have anything else? Otherwise, I will go ahead and see if there are any members of the
back to page 33, the story about, the board that was just a really crazy whacked out board. And in my terms, I'm sorry. And then, whole new board came on and the board president, and basically, little education, sounds like a very hard worker, but she was able to lead the board and bring people together. And she knew that when things were off, she was able to bring the board back together. And that's a really good story there too. Somebody who really cares about the education of the children. So, and the 7 C's, you have to have 7 C's because there are 7 C's on Earth here. 6 didn't do it for me. 7 is golden. Okay.
So I want to throw in one thing on what Scott had to say about vision. My favorite vision statement, quality is job one. So that's an old Ford one. It has impact and implies action. And no matter if you're on the shop floor or in the boardroom, you know what your job is.
All right. Thank you both. Any other board members have anything to say at the moment? We're looking good. Again, so appreciate everyone's time and investment in the process. At this time, I am going to see if we've had any members of the public hanging out with us who might want to comment or ask us any questions. Do we have any requests for comment at this time?
There's nothing on text.
And nothing on email.
No one on Zoom.
All right, thank you all. Then we will go ahead and do our homework for the next time that we have a special session on this item, which Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it is March 23rd. So 4 weeks from today on this topic, correct?
I don't have it in front of me, but that sounds correct.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you, Deborah.
And I'm not sure if we're virtual or in person. And I haven't been
originally, we really wanted this work to be in person. The Omicron variant threw us for a loop. Knocking on wood, I think we're out of the woods on that particular variant. So we would hope that the next one can be in person.
Well, there's cheap flights to Hawaii.
All right. So, Scott, you'll circle back with us and let us know any changes, whether again on the next meeting on this topic for school versus in person.
I'll work with Deborah and Nicole and their team to make sure we're all in alignment.
Just one more thing, Deborah, can you clarify the homework? I know there was the quotes, but and then
then on page 11 of the big book, and then page 29. Well, 27, 28, 29. So it's really just to talk about the strategic thinking. Just answer those questions on page 29, because it talks about what, so what, and now what. So those are the 2 assignments. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Carolyn. Now I know my homework. I appreciate it. So at this point, I think we are ready for a motion for adjournment. Would anyone like to make that motion?
I move.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you, George. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good
See
night,
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Mhm.